Hi everyone, sorry for the false start. We're going to try again. First I'm going to just pin what we're talking about. And now I'm going to get Lee from Plant Paper. And as we're waiting to connect, again, I'm talking to Plant Paper, and the topic of discussion today is clean is a construct. There we go. Hi.
Hey, Bonnie.
Hi. Sorry about that. It was like a little bit of a technical, but here we are.
Here we are.
Yeah. Thank you. This will be a fun topic. We've obviously spoken about a lot of different things that we're talking about today outside of this, so I'm pleased to bring it here into this space.
Me too. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited.
So I'd love, should we just kick off? Just tell us a little bit about what Plant Paper is and what inspired you to begin it would be cool.
For sure. So I think we first started thinking about toilet paper going back almost 5 years now. I think toilet paper is one of those things that most people pay very little attention to. Even people who are otherwise fairly conscious in their purchasing decisions, conscious in their behaviors with respect to their environmental, ecological footprint. But toilet paper has for a long time just been one of those things that most people don't think about at all. And so I think about 5 years ago, we first began thinking about it. And I think the way that started was the discovery that toilet paper, as inevitable as it seems to us now, that toilet paper should be made from wood, wasn't in fact always made from wood. That's a relatively new phenomenon, that goes back to just a few years before the turn of the 20th century. Prior to that, people had been using all kinds of other things, most of which would seem really uncomfortable to us nowadays, but which did have all of which had the benefit of not cutting, not wasting tremendous amounts of natural capital in the form of the boreal forests that go into toilet paper as most of us know it. So it was that was the first light bulb that went off. Like, wow, it could be made from something else. And yeah.
And I think too, just like realizing that that's what it is. I think often, I don't know, we just accept so many things often as just being what they were and always have been, but that's not necessarily the case in terms of the history of things. And often we can go backwards sometimes on design, which is not a bad thing.
100%. I think, there's, as with so many consumer packaged goods and products of big industry, the underlying processes and resources that go into the making of those things are totally hidden from us. And in the case of toilet paper, I think that's been really by design. From the outset, which is to say about 100 years ago or a little bit more, toilet paper companies went out of their way to make sure that when we talked about toilet paper or thought about toilet paper, we weren't really thinking about the substance of it. In fact, early on, you had the toilet paper companies would say things in their marketing materials like, you can just ask for Scott, or you can just ask for Hackle, to save you the embarrassment of actually saying toilet paper. So, let alone thinking about the trees that went into it, the chemicals that went into it, the indigenous lands that were taken away from communities like that. You weren't even anywhere near that. We could not even say what it was that we were using. So there's a whole history of concealment there.
Yeah, and I think, that is what, we've spoken about that too, that idea that taking ownership over the process of it, not only just the stigma around kind of the heightened privacy that we kind of put upon the experience of something we do every day, which is going to the toilet. And I think it's a similar kind of divorcement of our responsibility to where that all then goes. It's kind of this detachment, and which waste often is, which is going into the psychology of waste. We love to detach ourselves from things and basically be okay, I'm not responsible for this anymore. And we can shift it onto someone who's far away, or a community that is far away, which it becomes further and further away for so many people. For instance, both of us living in big cities, that where that goes to, our waste is so far away. And obviously in other countries, in some countries, can just literally go to like we were saying, to their doorstep, and can not go far because the infrastructure for kind of waste management is just not there. So I think that's, whilst it's great that we don't have to live by our trash, it also means that we can really not have any connection to it.
100%. It's funny how bound up, for us, the difference between, let's call it a developed nation and a developing nation. One of the ways that one could measure that is, in what those countries do with their waste. Mm-hmm. In the case of you or me here, in big cities on the coast of the U.S., we produce waste, we put it typically in a plastic, white plastic bag. It gets mm-hmm. brought somewhere else, and that is the picture of hygiene. That's the picture of progress and development. Whereas the symbol of the absence of development is, we don't put it into a a white plastic bag. We just put it outside, and that seems somehow far more unclean. And it's true that, like, when you do that, you risk getting contaminated with your water getting contaminated, or somebody picking up a disease from something that grew in the waste. It's true, but those same risks exist here. Mm-hmm. Like we produce the same amount of waste here. We're just concealing the process better from ourselves, and we call that clean, and we call yes. what's done elsewhere unclean. And I think that's been such an interesting thing for us to think about, is the way that clean so often is just a kind of a set of symbols and cues that really have no substantive connection to healthfulness or hygiene in any objective sense. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, we design such kind of high-tech waste systems essentially to kind of hide what's really going on. And those things are still going on, and whilst we may not be able to see kind of what that creates to our air quality, or in the end our oceans and different things, I think it's like it's very short-sighted, basically, everything that is, and I think that's similar to kind of the short-sightedness of like material use, or accepting like material use, like trees and wood for paper. Yeah. Just kind of accepting those as being like limitless, or just having that kind of extractive nature that obviously this time, and we've lived in it, has been like time of extraction, basically. Totally. I'd also love, you mentioned like white trash bags. Yeah. And the color white is interesting because obviously we assume all toilet paper should be bright, brilliant white. Yep. But your paper isn't. It's like a kind of nice, natural, sort of light brown. Yeah. And I think just the color in itself teaches you so much about like the difference of what you've done. So it'd be interesting just to like talk about your product, but also just talk about this kind of colors that we associate with clean, or we've spoken a bit about how like the minute soap lathers in your hands and bubbles up, you think, oh, it's effective, it's cleaning, or you feel an exfoliant on your skin and you think, oh, it's doing something, but often that can be like microbeads of plastic. We have these associations with products and we assume like, oh, it's working. Yeah. Because we accept them to be like what they should be, which is a certain color or texture.
Exactly. I think like so many of the things that we associate with clean really are those sort of they're these symbols or these cues rather than anything meaningful, but they've become very important to us. We're very dependent upon them. Like if we don't see the foaminess in the dish detergent, if we don't feel the tingle on the skin when we wash our face, we feel like it's not clean. But of course, like that has nothing to do with whether the product is really working as a detergent or a degreaser or whatever. In the case of toilet paper, white has there's been for a long time, maybe forever, a really interesting connection between cleanliness and social status or wealth. And going back to at least Middle Ages, you had royalty, nobility, people of tremendous means who were wiping with white linen. Or lace in the case of the French nobility, and in general, not only wiping with those things, but using them, and it was a powerful symbol of their wealth, the ability to have something so white, to keep it so white, presumably to dispose of it when it could no longer be kept so white.
And such a statement to be able to like waste that type of material, just like because you can. Yeah,
exactly, like the equivalent of wiping with money or something. And I think that most of us don't see it this way, but like our attachment to white toilet paper is very much a product of that feeling that a truly civilized person, whatever that means, would only wipe with something white. And on the other side of it, there's industrially produced toilet paper really only came into being, as I've said, maybe 120 years ago or so, and that was right around the time that the germ theory of disease kind of came into consciousness. And so at the same time as you had this sort of fetishization of the color white as a symbol of wealth and status, white also came to symbolize this kind of approach to creating a sterile environment, and the idea that like if you bleach the hell out of something, then you've made it clean, you've made it safe. But what we know now is that loading something up with bleach and then putting it on your body, especially on a permeable membrane like the ones that we're using our toilet paper on, is profoundly unclean, or at a minimum, to say something more objective, profoundly unhealthy and unhygienic. And it's just one of these funny sort of bait and switches where it's like, well, here, if you use the white paper, you're going to get clean. Well, actually, if you're using the white paper, that in some form or another, you are applying bleach, formaldehyde, a bunch of other carcinogens to your body, and not only to your body, but in one way or another, you're responsible for the presence of those chemicals in wastewater and runoff, and the whole, sort of tracing it all the way back to the production processes that make that toilet paper in the first place. So we really wanted to, from the get-go, we really wanted to avoid that and help people begin to see how arbitrary and unnecessary it was to have toilet paper look that way.
Yeah, and like you say, you realize like your skin being your largest organ, you're obviously absorbing at a fast rate all the products that you use in your house. And I think often, we're talking a bit about, the other day I was making a cleaning product just from vinegar and citrus like peels. And you begin to see all the different products you have in your house that say all the different things for all the different surfaces they should be used for. And you think like, what is the difference between something that's cleaning a kitchen and a bathroom? But it is, they are literally products that like cleaner for bathroom, cleaner for kitchen, and things like that. And often, most of the time, brands are wanting to have a whole different range of products, and also most of the time you're buying the packaging in which it's wrapped in. Like when you think of price, often unfortunately you're buying that. But I think another big, you go to things like trying to seek lower impact alternatives, and obviously the huge issue around that is the accessibility and the affordability of those things. And often these new products come out, but it's realizing too, you can just like really pull back and simplify, either just use less products, or again, just question your kind of psychology behind why you go to want to clean something if maybe it doesn't need to be cleaned. And actually, like we're saying, putting these kind of chemicals on surfaces in end, like maybe not that great for our immune system and different parts of our body that we can actually naturally fight and should be naturally fighting within our like own. This is definitely kind of, whilst obviously we've been all washing our hands a lot this year and the last year and sanitizing things. It's just, you realize like, what will that actually do in the long term of like our immunity, I wonder, like
No,
being inside a lot as well.
In some ways, 2020 was a very good year from an environmental perspective. Obviously, far less air travel, less emissions, and so forth. But I'm sure you're right that that on the whole, we're far more of these kind of scorched earth cleaning chemicals used in 2020, and one way or another, I'm sure there's a kind of measurable impact. I mean, and these things, one of the things about chemicals like bleach, formaldehyde, is it's not like they just, you put them into something and then you use that thing and then, it goes away. What makes some of those chemicals so damaging and scary is that they create these persistent, I think they're called persistent organic pollutants that are like very, very difficult to eradicate, like dioxins. And they happen even in our house. If we use lots of bleach in our house to clean a surface, and then you cook in the house, somehow the particulate or the compounds that are released in the cooking can bind with these dioxins and really turn your house into a poisonous environment. I have a strong feeling that there's a lot more of that going on over the course of the last year, when everybody's been like, well, I'm just going to nuke this place because I can't, I got to be extra careful.
Yeah, it's scary. And things, obviously, as even more things showed up, like how long things can last on certain surfaces and different things. It's kind of an interesting kind of idea, like how you treat the materials in your home. I think, it goes back to, a lot to like my curiosity and interest in single-use plastics and the kind of damaging effects of single-use plastics. Now, obviously, like, take even just like a plastic cutting board, for instance, like you cut and cut and cut on that, and you're creating grooves in it that enable bacteria to sit in those grooves that the knife has made and literally just like feed on that plastic board. Whereas you go back to a wooden board that like doesn't do that. It literally, bacteria can't sit in it. It doesn't find a home for it. And, you can just sand down a board and reuse it. Yeah. So it's like how you look at like materials for holding bacteria, and just how if you take care of something that maybe at first purchase was slightly more expensive, but you're not going to kind of need to buy a new cutting board. Yep. And just taking care of that. I think it's just like the long-sighted, like being long-sighted with materials is a difficult also conversation I find, because, it's always going back to like, until all these kind of systems and methods are made kind of accessible and making sure that too, like, policy protects us. I think that's a big thing too. I don't know if there is any policy around toilet roll or things that can't be put in certain products too. You wonder if like, until things like that exist, policy that protect people's health, like how can why will brands shift?
Toilet paper has escaped some of the scrutiny that you'd have in things like topical cosmetics and soaps that go directly on the skin, because it has been viewed as kind of like a more superficial interaction that we have with the product. But in fact, it's not like you're just wiping your the rough surface of your hand. Like that part of the body is extremely vulnerable, extremely permeable, and it ought to be regulated, but it definitely hasn't been. And as a result, we were introducing some really irritants irritants to the body with measurable impacts. That of course, like hemorrhoids are a major issue. Something like my wife Diva, who's one of my partners in Plant Paper, we just had a baby a couple months ago, and I learned that something like 50% of women who have a child will get hemorrhoids. It's a major issue, and really debilitating. It's super painful. It's now believed that the use of toilet paper that contains bleach and formaldehyde exacerbates hemorrhoids and a number of other uncomfortable conditions, UTIs, fissures, all sorts of things that one would prefer to avoid. But the toilet paper industry has kind of managed to avoid taking any responsibility.
Yeah, I also wonder, I mean, it's similar to really when you think about like menstruation products too, and like how much, you know, this exact same material, different things, ingredients that can be in sort of more toxic toilet paper exists in that too. And it's just terrifying, the kind of health kind of issues that can create for people. And I think that at least is becoming, you know, a more kind of spoken about topic. And again, even the kind of the access to those materials and how much kind of poverty that creates. And I think similar to toilet roll, like hygiene and when you think about, I guess, more developing world countries, like how that is where so many issues can stem from, that access to hygiene products, kind of more, you know, more obviously the infrastructure of bathrooms and toilets themselves, but also just kind of the product.
No, 100%. You know, I think you mentioned that you mentioned earlier that, you know, when we buy these products, I think the theme that we're getting at here is that like there's so much that escapes our notice. You know, there's in terms of environmental impacts, in terms of health impacts. It's like some of these practices are so deeply embedded into the structure of our society, into the structure of our economy, that it's easy to just to kind of miss it. It's like you know, it's like the fish that is looking for water, even though it's swimming around in an ocean full of it. It's like it's right there in front of you. I think you know, on the plastic side, you know, it's something that really caught my attention, was finding that something like 99% of a single-use plastic is essentially a form of fossil fuel. Fossil fuel goes toward making it. It's in the same way that, you know, Michael Pollan kind of famously pointed out that like you go into the grocery store and basically everything you're looking at is just a form of corn in different boxes and different forms. Well, when we look at plastic, we're just looking at different forms of oil or natural gas.
And we don't connect that, I think, often. You know, we assume, like we talk about fossil fuels and extraction, and we just assume, you know, transportation, flying, things like that. But plastic is just basically another way that the fossil fuel industry were like, great, this is a huge other earner for us. And you know, I think I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, Greenpeace, who I do a lot of work with, were doing some work on trying to stop essentially these like large fossil fuel and plastic companies from trying to basically release kind of totally basically a perspective that like buy more plastic during this pandemic because it's a cleaner thing, and selling this idea through governments essentially, and trying to kind of create a full kind of believable argument, which was completely not based on any truth. But, you know, the minute people weren't flying and using their cars as much, and I'm sure there was a plummet in sales of gas, like what more can you push? Plastic.
No, totally. It's really crazy to think. It's crazy that, I mean, we were talking before about how you know, how cleanness is often about a set of cues. I think plastic, single-use plastic in particular, is like one of the most important cues for hygiene. Like when we see that something's been wrapped in plastic, or it's made of plastic and it's intended for single use, for most of us, whether we like it or not, in some way or another, that communicates like, okay, that's safe to use, as opposed to something that, you know, was sitting out, or you know, like a metal fork or something, or even, I think, you know, there's a tendency to think of like bamboo silverware as somehow, maybe it, you know, is that somehow storing bacteria in a way that wrapped plastic would not? And we you know, we notice it with toilet paper. Like we've moved away entirely from the use of plastic in our packaging, and the way that, you know, we've gotten around it is using a recycled chipboard box. But there, you know, as we've I've been in conversation with some big chain retailers. You know, a lot of them are like, wait, like, how do you know that that's hygienic? How do you know that? And we've all been trained to think that the only way to ensure that something is hygienic is through plastic. And
Yeah.
we've been trained to think that way because, like you said, there's deeply vested interests that need to find a way to use that fossil fuel, that need to find a way to make plastic. But it has no bearing in reality on hygiene.
Yeah. I think it just shows too, like how, you know, if you think about the 60s being like the booming time of plastics and all these kind of like disposable, use once, it was like, you know, you look back at some of the advertising campaigns that existed during that time and they look like shocking today.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think it just shows though, like, how do you, whilst I don't think change should only be made by just being an ethical consumer, it needs to go beyond that. I think you do need to radically kind of advocate for change through policy and different things. I think it can't just be through the way we buy things, whilst that is power for sure, where we spend our money, but I think it also has to be kind of go down through other layers of transparency and policy and business. But it does just show how powerful, you know, fashions and changing and shifting perspectives like can be the minute you kind of remove stigmas around something or you make something cool again. Like, it's pretty wild how things can kind of have a domino effect.
Totally. I think, you know, all of us are so fully at the to varying degrees at the mercy of cultural norms, and it's very hard for us to break out of them independently. Like, we need it happen when it happens. It happens in some sort of group setting, you know, like there's a group of people that I see doing this thing and it's changing the way I think about it. And I totally agree with you, you know, like there's, you know, there's certainly forms of advocacy that happen at the level of, or activism even, that happen at the level of just purchasing decisions. But in the end, you know, something that I've been struck by recently is, you know, given what happened in the U.S. Capitol last week, you know, you have all these financial institutions or companies that are now withholding donations from those who supported, you know, rejecting the vote, and that has a real impact. Like, it's very scary for some of these politicians. And by the same token, there was an interesting thing that happened a couple of months ago. There was a group of shareholders in Procter and Gamble, which is Procter and Gamble is one of the biggest. I think it's the #1 purchaser of pulp derived from the boreal forest in the world. And there was a sort of a rebellion of a kind within the major shareholders of Procter and Gamble, something like that represented something like 2/3 of the outstanding shares in the company. And these stakeholders were companies like, you know, BlackRock and huge university endowments that control like billions and billions and billions of dollars. They basically went to P&G and just said, look, like, you've got to make a change. We're not going to stand for this anymore. And so then you wonder, and it should be said, to this point, P&G has not really done anything, but the resolution was passed among the shareholders to try to use considerably less boreal pulp. But my point in bringing that up is that, you know, we, the consumers, have certain powers of persuasion or market powers that we can exert. But at the same time, like, who are the people controlling those, you know, all of those assets that get to decide where money goes and ultimately have a really outsized role in determining how these companies do their business? Like, they're people too, you know, and maybe some of them are watching this conversation now. So like, it's not, it's about not just making the change at home, or, you know, I'm going to buy this thing or be supportive of this thing, but going out and talking about it, and talking about it passionately. Like, you never know how that influence is going to filter up to people who have, you know, far more power than you or I might have, you know?
Yeah, and you made a good point too of like this idea we assume these corporations are just these kind of big entities behind kind of a big building, but they are people at the end of the day, and they can shift and change their opinion towards things that can be massively kind of effective on like a really big large scale. Because I think it's amazing, you know, always happens on the kind of, you know, the edges and fringes of kind of fashions and brands and change, but like that does, you know, seep through and can create, like, you want everyone doing it, you know, rather than it just being like, oh, we want to do it and prove someone else wrong. You want
Yeah.
everyone on the same page doing everything. There was a question too, a little bit about more in the comments about your paper particularly. It'd be good just to end on, yeah, what your product is. And I obviously love it. And just we spoke a little bit about how most toilet paper is made from wood pulp. But yeah, it'd be cool just to end just what plant paper is made of, and like how that creates a lower impact by using that product. Would be
Definitely.
cool.
Definitely. So when we first started working on the business or the product that would become plant paper, we were, you know, our goal was to make a toilet paper from a biomass that was an agricultural byproduct, something that was already growing. You know, one of the things that's, you know, something that already had a purpose, but that was creating a waste stream. So we looked at hemp, cannabis hemp, which is obviously something that has grown far more widely now than it was even 5 years ago. And we were, we're still very excited about hemp as a material. And I know that some of the big companies, the P&Gs and the Kimberly-Clarks of the world have played with it and agree with us that it's a really promising avenue. But what we found a couple of years ago is that the supply chain really wasn't there. It isn't there just yet. So we turned to another plant, bamboo. Bamboo is really exciting because for a couple of reasons. One, it's the fastest growing plant on the planet. Bamboo can grow up to 1 meter in a day, and reaches maturity. That is, you know, a point where it can be harvested in some cases less than a growing season. Whereas when you're cutting down trees, even the ones that are replanted, like what's called plantation forestry, they have to wait 20 or 40 years in order for them to grow. And when they're cutting down trees in a virgin forest, sometimes those trees can be 100, 120, 150 years old. So it's super fast growing, super low water requirements. It converts carbon dioxide to oxygen far more quickly and efficiently than trees. So all of those things made it really attractive. But I think what made it, what sort of sealed the deal was the fact that bamboo has very long, strong fibers because of this, in a sense, because of the speed at which it grows and the consistency with which it grows. And those fibers translate into, that fiber length translates into a product that is much stronger and softer than what you would get from some other materials. And, you know, something that was clear to us at the outset was, you know, you can talk all day about how bad paper made from the boreal forest is, but if your alternative is something that feels rough or uncomfortable or rips easily, nobody's gonna do it. So bamboo kind of met all of those criteria, and I think that the next piece, and we've spoken about this a little bit, was recognizing that we didn't need to bleach it in order to make it soft, and we didn't need to bleach it in order to make it an appealing product. Like there are other ways that one can present a product. You know, we've spoken a lot about this, but how do you change attitudes and change norms in order to make something that people might previously have seen as somehow less than, or unhygienic, actually seem like the more hygienic choice, which it is. So you know, that was the kind of the background, and then began the hard work and the long work of working with different manufacturers to make sure that we could get a product that felt really amazing. And so we worked on one of our ideas early on was to try to use the texture of toilet paper to make it more, actually better performing. Like for the most part, when you have an embossing pattern in toilet paper, is really just there as a decorative element, and also to make sure that the plies stay together. But we kind of felt like if you're going through the work of doing that, can we actually make the toilet paper work better so that in the end you can use less of it? I think all of the toilet paper companies, as with so many other big industry, big CPG businesses, they're not asking how can they make the consumer use less of something.
No,
They're asking how they
more.
can use more. So that's for us, the embossing pattern was a way, and there were some other variables that we were playing with, like the size of the sheets, the size of the rolls, even to sort of control these certain psychological parameters that would encourage people to use less.
Because I feel like people made like bigger rolls, more layers, like just so many all these things to like think, oh, it's more and more, which is in our brain we think it's better and better. And you just kind of you just use so much of it, and I think that's what I found too so interesting about bamboo, just how it has a natural softness to it, which kind of then eradicates the need for putting in these kind of softeners into stuff, which just like it seems like the perfect match.
Totally. And the question that I was asking myself for a while was like, look, we know that it's possible to make really soft toilet paper from things other than trees. And there's pressure on some of these big companies that do make toilet paper from trees to turn away from tree-based paper. Why don't they do it? Why don't they just make the switch? And I think the unlock for me was the discovery that basically all these toilet paper companies were, at their foundings, timber companies or forestry companies, logging companies. Like these are not companies that are in the business of making toilet paper. They are in the business of cutting down trees and making forest products from those trees. So yes, they theoretically, like they have the know-how to make incredibly soft, great paper from things other than trees, but it would completely undermine their business model. So hopefully, one day they'll be willing to sort of cannibalize their own sales and accept lower margins, but not anytime soon. And that's where we come in.
Yeah, it's interesting too, like you're saying, like we were talking about how plastic companies are fossil fuel, industry, and it's interesting thinking about toilet paper as like logging companies. It just instantly shows these kind of different facets they have, and you realize their interests are invested in the wrong parts of the business. So in a way it's kind of switching. You're doing like a tree-free paper. And I also wanted to share with people watching, if you are inspired by the conversation and you do want to try plant paper, you can use the code that we've created. That's my name, Bonnie15. And that, if I'm correct, is for like new subscribers. And at the moment, it's just within the US and the province of Ontario. Is that right?
Yep, correct.
Yeah. So if you want to try, and I'll also put that in the comments so people remember, that hopefully people feel inspired to try something new, or even just do their own research into, the toilet paper you're currently using, what it's made of, and just seeing little shifts that you could change if you're able to is great. If people obviously will be tuning in from different parts of the world where they maybe can't get plant paper yet.
Absolutely. I would just say that there's I'm a big fan of the work that Janet Ferskine and Shelley Vineyard do over at the NRDC. They've put out 2 really interesting reports called The Issue with Tissue, and then there was a follow-up, The Issue with Tissue 2. They have a great kind of ranking system for if you want to know what's in your toilet paper now and how it checks out from an ecological perspective, it's a great first resource to turn to.
Oh, cool. Okay. What was that called? Because I'll put it in the comment too.
It's The Issue with Tissue. The Issue with Tissue.
Okay, cool.
If you Google that, you'll definitely find it.
Yeah, cool. Well, it's been so great to talk. I hope people have found this interesting, and we obviously have Lots of similar interests. I mean, the psychology behind waste is also why I started a few years ago a group called Waste Watch with my friend Georgia. So all the stuff behind our relationship to waste is something that I'm really interested in, and how that needs to shift if we're to change like how much we create. I don't think we can just create less. I think we have to like own our waste basically, and have a better relationship to it.
100%. We're totally on the same page, and we just want to say that, you know, we at Plant Paper are super inspired by what you do, and grateful, you know, grateful for having us, but more generally just grateful for the work that you're doing. You know, this is one thing that I've found is that, you know, it's so important to bring in the challenge is to bring an environmental awareness, an environmental lens to everything we do every day, because that's just an accurate reflection of the fact that everything we do every day does have an environmental impact. Every choice we make at the end of the day does trace back to the use of some natural resource and the transformation of that natural resource. So the question is, like, how can we sort of create that lens and create that context through which to see all these choices? And I think that the work that you're doing makes that a lot easier. You know, I turn on my Instagram and I see you talking, and I see you bringing that consciousness to everything that you do, and it really it's super inspiring to me, and I know to so many other people. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. I agree. I think the minute you look into one thing, you can't help but it just kind of rolls into all these different things. I think you can't not begin to look at every facet. The minute you become sort of interested in one curiosity, I think there's so many, you know, subjects within the work of the environment, and I think naturally each we'll have one thing that we're interested in. And I also just inspire people to do that. It's like pretty overwhelming, all these different topics, but find like one little thing you're into, and that will just open up the whole thing, I think.
A way in. That's all we need. A way in, and then it flows logically and naturally from there.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
It's been great chatting, and thank you everyone for tuning in.
Thanks everyone. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.